Ayca, Aydogdu, and welcome to Tell Me. Climate change is the defining crisis of our time, and it is happening even more quickly than we feared. It is a race we are losing, but it is a race we can win, said the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The Earth's atmosphere is warming faster than ever before, at least 1 degree Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, what scientists warn as unacceptable risk. If we don't slow global emissions, not only could it cause water shortages, limit food productions, but also an increase in the extreme weather events, resulting in more number of deaths due to floods, storms and heat waves. So most at risk could be poorer countries. The World Bank estimates due to droughts, if there's not enough action taken, 140 million people living in Africa, Latin America and South Asia will have to migrate by 2050. This also brings security problems such as political unrest and violence. Instead of going into more scientific data and endless risk to climate crisis, let me introduce my guest who can shed a better light to what's happening. It is reversible. Is it reversible? And can we save the world? Joining me today on the programme, as a young generation is the ones who will suffer the consequences, I have two young climate activists joining me from Fridays for Future, both organising demonstrations and raising awareness in their countries. Helena Marschall from Germany and Veruschka Dumeni from Namibia. And to talk about the facts, and someone who has been working nearly 15 years in international climate policies, global policy lead on climate change at CARE International, Sven Harmeling. Thank you all of you for joining us today on Tell Me. And also we will be showing our viewers videos who have sent us from all over the world about their thoughts and concerns. Now, I'm going to start with the same question to each of you, but I would like a short answer before we go into depth. So the question is, can we save the world? Helena, to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't really like the formulation of saving the world, because that sounds very abstract. This is really about saving, my generation's future and saving, and making the future livable for people all over the world who are already suffering the consequences of the climate crisis. And what's clear is we can still slow climate change down, and we can still address the climate crisis. And otherwise, we wouldn't be out on the streets. Otherwise, there would be no point to urging our governments to act. The science is very clear that although it would have been better if we had, addressed the problem 20 years ago, we can still, every degree of warming less means less suffering all over the world. So there's still a lot that we can save.
Veruschka, same question to you. Can we save the world?
Yes, I agree 100% with Helena. And more than that, it's also just implementing sustainable and regenerative systems, which not only lessen the effects of the global temperatures now, but also the effects, or the worst effects that we are foreseeing down the road for climate change. So it's not so much can we save the world, but how do we lessen the impact of the worsening effects of climate change that we'll be facing?
And Sven, to you.
Yeah, I'm definitely convinced that there's a hell lot of things we can do to keep the world in a much better place than it would look like if we don't act urgently. And I think every 10th of degree increase avoided counts. It's basically, there's a lot of things we can do to keep it in a much better state than otherwise.
Okay, and let's also now hear from our viewers. We have someone, Paloma from Brazil, and let's listen to what she's got to say.
Hello everyone, my name is Paloma Costa and I am from Brazil. I'm here to just share a message with you all. I think you all saw the fires in Brazil these years again, where the Amazon reached the tipping point in 2020 with 20% of forest loss and 26% of the Pantanal biome was left into ashes only with this year's fire. So my message to you is that all of our acts, individually, collectively and politically, have an impact in other parts of the world. And if the forest stands, it's because we resist. So I count with each and every one of you to resist with us for the forests, because this is what will make our future better. Thank you.
Now, Paloma is also part of the UN Youth Advocate Initiative, and Veruschka, so carrying on with you here, she has highlighted the effects on her country, how the climate crisis is affecting Brazil, and you have been very active in Namibia, so organising demonstrations there, drafting petitions. So what are the climate crisis effect on your country?
So due to our natural climate, the first way in which the climate effect will affect Namibia is in the area of drought, as well as in the area of flooding. We have experienced this year, and they say that the drought that we have experienced this year has been the worst that it has ever been within the last 90 years. So other than that, we look into how the social disparities that we are already facing now will be worsened with the marginalized communities that will be again infringed and ignored. So yeah, that's overall our action is to highlight to the public as well as to the government that it is not right that you are not acting. It is not right that you are downplaying the seriousness of this. It is not right that you are ignoring the science. Your inaction today will be highly, highly consequential and will give the young generation of today hardships that we will not be able to manage.
Well, let's bring in Sven here. Sven, so can you give us sort of an extensive picture of, if not enough action is taken at the moment, what kind of world are we looking at that we'll be living in?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, there's a real near-term dimension, right, where and that's maybe different than 10 or 15 years ago, that we're now talking about climate change as being something which happens today and is not just a future phenomenon or future threat. And some of the examples of impact have already been mentioned, but we're also seeing it in our world, for example, in our work in the many floods this year in Africa, in parts of Africa, extreme heat waves in Asian cities, for example, since a couple of years, every year kind of records. We see record storms, which just by the meteorological intensity are much stronger than things we've seen in the past and are much more frequent. So I think many countries experience either new phenomena, new risks, or an intensification of what they've seen before. But then Veruschka also mentioned, or that was a colleague from Brazil, mentioned the concept of tipping points. And I think that's something which has been observed and studied increasingly over the last 10 to 15 years, at what points in temperature increase globally as well as locally, certain parts of our climate system just, flip into a different state. And the Amazon Brazil is one of those examples where I remember that 10 years ago or so when I started my work, I also looked into some studies around when we might see a tipping point here. And I think the projections then were around maybe 2.5 or 3 degrees temperature increase. And now we're seeing it probably already much earlier because of the combined impacts of climate change, as well as, of course, people for various reasons and for various economic relations are cutting or burning the forest. And this is similar with other tipping points like the glacial melting in the Arctic, which seems to have come much closer and earlier than expected. And all of this, of course, has severe implications for people in the first place, in particular poor people.
So there's actually many aspects to think about when we're thinking on a global level how to tackle environmental issues. So let's now hear from Vandita from India.
Hi, I'm Vandita Saria from India, and we talk about climate change. So glad that we are talking about it. So it's not something, which is still arriving or waiting to happen yet. It has already happened. It has arrived. It's here. I work in the field of media, and even apart from my job, I use all kinds of mediums at my disposal to talk about climate change. I make cartoons, I write articles, I make short documentary videos to throw light on these issues. In personal capacity, I started with really small changes, like switching to metal straws, ditching plastic, mindful consumption, and not shopping just for the heck of it. And I think the need of the hour is now that first, we don't stay in denial anymore, and second, that we start acting. I mean, so much damage has been done everywhere, then you have the liberty to pick anywhere and start from there and to start undoing this change. So start small, start anywhere, but start you must and act you must. We just have one earth, guys. Thank you.
Now, it is nice to see that individual action is also being taken by many people, especially young people. And Helena, as you said, because when it was sparked by Greta Thunberg, of course, it raised a lot of awareness. Looking at it today, do you think it's doing the same? Is it more and more young people joining this movement and actually being aware of what it means for their future?
I mean, obviously it's difficult right now because mass protests is not as easy when we need to, keep social distancing and be responsible and in these times. And obviously, striking school does not have the same effect as it did 2 years ago. Governments simply, have gotten used to children sacrificing their education for their future, and they have gotten used to children, taking on the job that they should actually be doing. So we need to obviously look at different ways to continue to push for action, because what is clear is that even when everyone is saying that they've understood the gravity of the crisis, and even when politicians are talking about the youth, urging them to act, what at the end is important is the actions and how much emissions we are actually reducing. And we see there that we are not in line with the Paris Agreement, which was signed 5 years ago anywhere in the world right now. So yeah, I mean, we just need to keep fighting and need to continue, because we have just so much to lose if we give up.
Okay, and I'll bring Veruschka in here. So, Veruschka, as you are also part of Fridays for Future, I mean, the UN Climate Summit that was supposed to be actually this week has been postponed to next year. And I believe also Fridays for Future is actually working on a parallel summit which will mimic the 2-week event. What is the aim here, and how do we get more young people involved?
So yes, the parallel conference that Fridays for Future is planning is called Mock COP26. And it stemmed from the idea that we have not really been satisfied with any of the action or inaction, actually, that came from the past COP conferences. And so the idea came from, how can we bring young people across the world who are eco-aware, aware of the climate crisis and aware of the urgency that needs to be taken? How can we bring young people, and put them in leadership roles or positions? And how can we sort of analyze the ways in which they would tackle the climate crisis? What are the kind of policies that they would put in place? What are the kind of regulations and bans and restrictions that they would put in place? And it's also to highlight the plight of the global South, like Edward actually mentioned, which is that a lot of the voices that we hear from leaders are coming from, most of the time, from the global North. And so here we have young climate activists from the global South who are experiencing climate crisis firsthand, and they have the personal urgency for climate action. So how can we then take those people, again, put them in the international eye or spotlight, and really hear what they have to say? So essentially, that is what Mock COP26 is about.
And just quickly, I want to get Helena in here as well, because it is about young people here. So, Helena, talking about your disappointments, especially when it comes to the agreements and policy-making processes, and that you felt the need to be able to join this movement to make a difference for your future. But it is saddening to see that. Do you have anyone to look up to? Because that is also part of life.
I mean, honestly, I look up to other young people all over the world who are fighting this fight. And I think, I especially look up to people like Veruschka in other regions in the world who are already feeling the effects of the climate crisis head on and in real life. Because, I'm from Europe, and a lot of the time I'm talking about the climate crisis as a problem that will affect my future. In other areas of the world, especially the global South, the climate crisis is a problem that is affecting people's present and people's, livelihoods already, and people are losing their homes already because of, the problem that was mostly created by industry and governments of the global North. And, it inspires me every single day, and I look up to the people every single day who, get up and fight and keep going. And I think that's absolutely inspiring. But I also want to make clear that, we've been talking a lot about how do we get more young people involved, and of course that's important. But the problem is not the problem. The climate crisis is not solved because there are not enough young people involved. The problem is that governments are not acting. And I feel like we need to emphasize that again and again, because in the climate, talking about the climate crisis, it's so easy to shift the discourse, to, shift it to individual action, to shift it to people not using the right kind of straw or whatever for their drink. And that's not the problem. The problem is, fossil fuel companies and industries and governments that are continuing to put profits over our future.
That's a good message. Now, let's also listen to Aslı from Istanbul.
Hello everyone, I'm Aslı Yaman. I am co-founder of Kimma Coffee Roasters, based in Istanbul. I'm national coordinator of Specialty Coffee Association Turkey chapter. We have been working together with the farmers in order to bring them a more sustainable agricultural environment. Because we drink more than 2 billion cups of coffee in the world every day. And there is a big challenge for our future and the coffee production. The climate change is the key for our future. Unpredictable weather, pests, diseases simultaneously increase the cost of growing coffee and reduce yields. They say that if you find water rising up to your ankle, that's the time to do something about it, not even when it is around your neck.
Now, also, coffee is very interesting because 120 million people's livelihood depends on it, and by 2050, half of the farmland will be gone, and by 2080, they say coffee will be extinct. So if things don't change, there will be no coffee to drink, and of course, for many, they can't carry on with their livelihoods. And Sven, now continuing here with you after giving the stage to the young. Well, as we said, COVID-19 pandemic has actually put a halt to many things. And as to climate crisis, we are saying there's no time to lose. But EU's plan was a law that would set the EU onto an irreversible path to climate neutrality by 2050. Now, with the UN summit being postponed to next year, but as seen to President-elect Joe Biden wanting to make the difference and rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, how are things moving? Are they moving too slowly, and does it look bright for the future?
Well, I think one of the challenges in the climate movement we always have is what do we measure against the progress, right? Of course, we're still far behind what we scientifically need, and we need to absolutely accelerate action everywhere, as the colleagues also have said. But on the other hand, I would say we are now in a better situation than 6 months ago, with a much stronger push in the EU for more ambitious climate targets in a coordinated way to some extent with countries like China, South Korea and others. Of course, now in the US, definitely a much better prospect than if Trump had been re-elected. And of course, just joining the Paris Agreement or rejoining it is the simple part. Just being a member of the club, so to say, is not by no means sufficient. And this, of course, has to be followed up by much more ambitious action in the US and elsewhere. But I think, all the youth movements that we're discussing and heard about have been a very important societal tipping point over the last months. And I see it in the EU, where this really had quite some impact on the decision makers, on the public discussion, so it's absolutely essential.
And earlier on, you also talked about adaptation gaps. Could you open that up a little bit? So, because as you said, it is moving much faster than anticipated. What needs to be done to fill those adaptation gaps?
Yeah, I mean, in every sector, whether it's in agriculture, in water, in development, planning of cities, there's so much more that needs to be done in terms of being prepared for heat waves, for droughts. And there have been quite some good examples, whether it's been drought-resistant seeds, whether it's been, for example, early warning systems, cyclone shelters to protect people from extreme disasters. And on the one hand, I think it's about scaling up those solutions. And some of this has to happen, or for some of this financial support by developed countries in particular, but also by the polluting companies, I think will be quite essential. But we also see some limits of the adaptation measures that have worked for a couple of years. And so adaptation is basically a constant innovation and a constant checking where we are against the changes we're seeing. And unfortunately, there are increasing parts of the world which reach their limits of adaptation, where people have to basically migrate and move out of their homelands. And I think this poses increasing challenges, which have to be tackled, of course, on very different levels, on the level of city planning, on national action, but also global cooperation, of course.
Okay, I want to bring Helena in here. As you've been quite outspoken about policies and a framework. And I believe you said recently that there is a need to define the V because we are not equally at fault. Could you extend that for us, Helena, a little?
Yeah, I think that was in the context of a discussion about how we need to act to address the climate crisis. And I feel like that's always very abstract because, it's not that the problem or the people who caused the climate crisis, and that is, fossil fuel companies and the governments that didn't act. Those are the people that need to fix it. So it's not so much that, we need to address the climate crisis, that they need to address it because that is their job. And I feel like we need to make that clear again and again and, make it absolutely, clear who are the people that are responsible in this situation right now and who are the people who have the power to fix this and to address this problem.
So now we have Holly from Hampshire. Let's watch her video.
So in the last 5 years, I think we've made quite a lot of progress as a family in terms of living more sustainably and being more aware of environmental issues. And certainly children are very connected to the environment around them. And if you talk to them about these issues, they're often really compassionate and want to know more and want to know how they can help. Sometimes it can feel as though you take big strides in one area and then tiny little baby steps in others. And speaking of babies, we have found probably that we've made the most headway there. Babies and children can be make a really big impact on your carbon footprint. And so it was really important to my family that we look to minimise that as much as possible. So we used reusable nappies, not consistently, but even if you just use one a day, it stops that one nappy, 364 or 5 nappies a year going into landfill for that one child.
Of course, we're talking about a global crisis here and how to tackle it, but it is like looking at COVID-19, how we're thinking about our health and how it would affect us. We're taking measures for ourselves. So individually, it would be the same for climate change because it is affecting as much. So Veruschka, continuing here with you, individually, what actions could we take and have you seen that action in Namibia, a new country?
Yes. So the individual actions that we can take is things like living sustainably, like the lady in the video just mentioned. It is about looking where our money goes. What do we vote with our money? What do we buy? Do we buy locally? Do we try and invest in any way that we can in greener, more sustainable, more eco-friendly product? And your question about whether I'm seeing that trend here locally, the answer to that is not really. Because living sustainably, such as eating more plant-based, eating more organic, walking and cycling rather than going with vehicles to places that are short distance away, things like that here, I actually seen a bit more of an elitist thing by local people, because we have already the big wealth gap in terms of some families have financial stability, some don't. There's social problems like poverty and unemployment. So people often focus more on their immediate problems, such as, do I have food on the table for me tomorrow, rather than what is the food that I'm eating and what am I supporting, what industries am I supporting? So yeah, the trend towards sustainable living is definitely slower than the trend towards climate action in terms of this systemic change here.
Well, we're coming towards the end of the program. So Helena, let's have the last message from you, actually, a message for the future.
I think the message is that we have still so much to save and we still have so much to gain from acting, and we can build a future that is so wonderful, because I feel like, we often talk about all these scenarios, what happens when we don't act, but what can happen if we do act? How can we make cities that are for people and not for cars? And how can we have cleaner air? And how can we, create a more resilient and more, a society that binds together with solidarity? And I feel like there's so much possibility still if we take the right steps now, and if we take them quickly, then we can, we have so much to gain. And I feel like that is such a it's not hope, because I don't want hope, I want action, but it is a positive outlook on what could happen if we take this essential action.
Well, Helena, Marschall, Veruschka, Dumeni and Sven Harmeling, thank you very much, all of you, for joining us in this edition of Tell Me. And thank you for watching us. You can get in touch with me through my Insta on Chacha and tell us what matters to you and what you would like us to talk about here on Tell Me. Now, before we go, we leave you with Leah from London, who has written a song about climate change and shared it with us. So thank you, Leah. Do stay safe and sane until next week.
If you were looking at an hourglass, look at what it's made.